lot of people paying crazy money for cars. You saw it in the Porsche world. You saw it in just even Cadillac SUVs. I mean, you saw it in everything. And I don't think that, you know, that market will find its way. There's a lot of cars like Mercedes G-Wagons and what have you that the market on a lot of that stuff is changing. On some of that stuff, the cars have changed $100 since we've been here. You know, I mean, they're ticking. It'll straighten itself out, and the cars aren't going to go down below really where they should. It's just that the cars got overinflated because of that.
Purely supply and demand, right? Couldn't get a new car, so the used cars just.
And cars are coming available. You know, things like C8 Corvettes. I mean, they're going to hold. Interestingly, I'm actually going to be curious to see. I was just yesterday. I was in. We had a Hurricane Ian hit Florida, and between 3 lots, we got about 3 lots in Central Florida. We got about, I think, somewhere around 56,000, 57,000 flood cars, you know, from the storm surge.
57,000.
The two lots specifically, they're right next to each other. They got there's 46,000 just between 2 lots.
They got another dealer.
No, it's not a dealer. It's they're auction companies, Copart and IAA. And what's interesting is IAA. When I was just there yesterday, and they had a block of C8 Corvettes. And when I tell you they just had them all together. I think they actually did it because it was like a photo shoot or something. There had to be 70, 80 of them, you know, just, you know, a car that you couldn't find. So I'm really going to be curious to see what, and interestingly, actually speaking to the market, the insurance companies, and I work with a lot of them, they just settled out all the claims, total loss. They didn't bother fixing anything. They didn't want to have anybody look at them. They just paid market on them, and that was it. They just let it rip. The salvage returns have been so strong that the cars, most of the flood cars are going to be bringing 55% of retail value on a salvage sale. And so because of that, you know, they're getting out, for about 50 cents on the dollar as far as the actual loss. And, but the market is so strong on salvage right now, they just decided to don't even fight with people, just write the checks, close it all out, and not only that, but might get married and do don't get married and have them try and fix them or repair them or what have you. But I think the late model stuff it's going to listen to Ferrari stuff, the Porsche stuff. I mean, Porsche availability is nil. The desirability is very, very high. The product is fantastic. That's going to be holding, you know, true. And not only that, but the people that support the market are well capitalized. They can pay it. The Ferrari market is always been the Ferrari market has been over MSRP on all the good cars for decades.
Ferraris have been around
for over decades. And but I think some of the modern, just regular cars, SUVs and what have you, I think that's got a little overblown, and that's going to sort itself out. But
well, and another thing, you know, when we start talking about the modern cars, it sort of leads me back to, you know, people saying, well, what are other sort of themes in the collector car market? I know all of you have certainly talked about this or heard me talk about it, or you're buying cars with this in mind, but you know, I can't say enough, manual transmission cars, especially where there was an option, you know, whether that's a manual transmission sort of later model Ferrari. What I mean by later model are sort of the end of the manual transmissions, your 360s, your 430s, your 550s, before they went to the paddle shift. And again, the new cars are amazing. Ferrari, Lamborghini, Porsche. Now, you can still buy a Porsche with a manual, but you haven't been able to buy a Ferrari with a manual or a Lamborghini with a manual. They've never had a McLaren with a manual. But you know, those cars. I mean, just to give you an example, the premium has sort of changed a little bit. But if you took your average Ferrari 360 or 430 for that matter, and these are cars, for those of you that don't know, these are mid-engine Ferrari cars from the early 2000s and mid-2000s, and they were offered, the majority of the cars were offered with the paddle shift, and it was a very primitive paddle shift compared to the dual clutch that we have today. Very hot when it was released, but now it seems a little clunky, although people do love them, some people do. But generally though, if you took exactly the same Ferrari 360 or Ferrari 430 in terms of color and condition and mileage and everything is exactly the same, and you took the paddle transmission, you took the stick transmission is going to bring roughly between 50 to 100% premium over the paddle shift. And lately it's been inching closer to the 100% premium. Okay, it's gone down as low as 50%. And again, doesn't mean that every car is the same. You got to go and take cars on condition. But you know, manual transmission, later model cars, they're, you know, that's where the people want that. And you know, we could talk all the reasons why that is. Most of you, I'm sure, could go and figure that out. But you know, I mean, another example is, I'm going to use the Ferraris again. Ferrari 550 and 575. If you didn't know what you were looking at, the cars looked virtually identical. All of the 550s had manuals. The vast majority of the 575s were paddle shifts. The vast majority, something like 3% of them were manuals. Your average your 550 and a 575, all else being equal, that is over 100% premium. Over 550 over 575, just because of that manual transmission. So, you know, that's another thing to go and consider, especially when you're looking at and you know, it's something like a PDK Porsche versus the manual transmission Porsche. You know, back when I mean, it's at the end of the day, the manual transmissions, nobody wants them when they're out. Even a brand new Porsche still sells. The vast majority of them are not manuals. But a few years down the road, the manual transmission car will, and it has always been shown to carry a very large premium over the, and I don't think that's going to end.
So Michael, they're not
Yes.
my cup of tea, but it seems that even the early Teslas, the Lotus-based Teslas, are starting to appreciate.
That's another very good one. The gentleman sitting in front of you may not want to talk about that.
I love your source of
So that's an interesting one because so for everybody that doesn't, so Teslas, okay, the very first commercially released Tesla was actually called the Tesla Roadster, and it was based on the Lotus Elise. It had a 2-speed transmission, but it was a fully electric car. Okay, back at the time there was nothing else like that out there anywhere. Very lightweight car, unbelievably fast. They didn't sell a tremendous amount of them, and for a long time, nobody wanted the car, especially after a few years when the batteries failed. And not only, even if you wanted to go and replace the batteries, you couldn't even, Tesla wouldn't even do it for you. And again, I don't mean to keep poking the sore spot here, but you know, but since it was brought up. What has happened though, in the last couple of years, is that the Tesla Roadsters, and I believe it's, you know, realize there's another part of that new generation, and I hate to say it, and I mean, you know, cars themselves, you're always going to have young people and older people. We just love cars. Human beings love cars. I don't think that's going to go away. But there is undeniably a portion of the population, especially the young population, who, unfortunately, there's a big part of them because they're living virtually right now. They could care less. I was just talking to somebody last night, one of my son's friends, they're turning 16. It's like, oh, did you go and get his driver's license? He didn't even take the driver's ed. He doesn't even care. Doesn't even care. And there's lots of these young people like that, that 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old could care less about driving. I don't know why, it doesn't make any sense to me, but, well, you know, but there's also a segment, there's also a segment of the young population that is looking at a company like Tesla as they do their Apple iPhone, and they have this allegiance to them. And Tesla's done a very good job in their branding, and when they would go and buy a car, you ask them what they want, and they say, I want a Tesla. well, what if you, they're like, it's like, well, I want an iPhone. They wouldn't even consider buying something else. And then this is the end of what I want to say, and I'm going to let you talk, Bruce. The Tesla Roadster is seen as now the genesis of that company. And so all of a sudden, prices are just shooting up like crazy. Would I go buy one as an investment right now personally? I don't think so. But there's a lot of people that are. Yes, Bruce?
My Roadster was a blast until, not that guy.
Until.
But the point I wanted to make is that this generation, because you were talking about that, you say, well, I want a Tesla just like they want an Apple iPhone, is the thing that's different that I've seen and experienced is that they don't, to them, it's a Tesla. They don't fall in love with the car.
Correct.
This is an appliance.
Yep.
That they'll drive it for a year, and then the next one, there's not an attachment to the car, whatever it represents. And it's like for us, a car was freedom. It was
That's
all
right.
this stuff, and it was.
They're more
it's just
interested
an
in
appliance.
into what they see on the screen in the middle of the car and what the latest thing is there than they are about the driving experience.
Yeah. And the car is just an appliance.
The car is an appliance, but that's the reality. And that's why cars like the Tesla Roadster, I see you back there, Jeff. That's the reason why I think, and I think a lot of other people are, they're looking at that and sort of it's the Apple One, okay? The Apple One computer of the electric car.
Yeah.
It's not really the first electric car, we all know that, but it's the first commercially successful all-electric car company. It's the first example, and people want to own that. So there you go. Jeff.
Fascinating discussion. A couple of things I wanted to follow up on. Bruce brought one of them up. Is how do you see younger people using automobiles differently than we enjoy automobiles? It's all about enjoyment, but how do they enjoy them differently than we do? And the second
It's a
is,
very good
what do you
question.
see as the rates of change relatively in the brand equity? You just touched on Tesla. We see like Haggerty's recent figures about brand equity being very high for Ferrari and Porsche, of course, even for Chevrolet with the Corvettes. So if you would educate us a bit about your experience with how are people enjoying cars differently and how are brand equities changing as a result?
I'm going to answer that. I'm going to let Chip answer that after me. What I can say is if you're worried about the next generation and whether they're into cars, and yes, there may be younger people that aren't getting their driver's license, what I can tell you is every month at the Post Houston downtown, there is a Cars and Coffee that happens, and it's free to anybody that wants to go down there if you want to bring your car. Every month, rain or shine, I don't care, there are thousands of young people, not all young people, but mostly young people, that are down there at the post at 6:30 in the morning, wanting to go either see the cars or in some cases show off their cars, okay? I am not exaggerating when I say thousands, okay? Not hundreds, thousands, all right? Bad weather or good weather. I think that that's just one example. Yes, we live in Houston. We're a car-based city, but I don't think that's any different around a lot of the country, okay? Young people still love cars, and they still want to go out there, and they still, the majority of them value the freedom that the car gives them. And, I can just tell you what I've seen. I took Chip, and we talked about it earlier, to this Catalina coffee event that we do it every Sunday morning. It's just a sort of an organic thing. Hundreds of people there. Cars are lined up for blocks. Young people with, their car that they were working on in their garage, and it may be some, those of us in this room may look at that and go, wow, what's that piece of junk? And yet that is their pride and joy. And they brought that car there. And let me tell you what, it is the greatest thing to go and see that kind of thing, because you got an 18-year-old young man there, or young woman in a lot of cases, that they are proud of their car, and they came out at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning to go and show off that car, okay? And there's a lot of that, all right? I'm going to let Chip, I have my thoughts on brand equity to answer the second part of your question. Did I answer the first part appropriately?
Yeah.
Brand equity is a little more interesting one, and I think that's a little more, especially since Chip mentioned that he used to trade Porsches. Well, Chip was the general sales manager of the largest, in terms of volume, the largest Porsche dealer in the country for 20 years, okay? So he knows a little bit about brand equity.
But here's, I guess one of the things I will tell you that I've noticed, and only because we were talking about Tesla, because of one of the things that I do for several of the insurance carriers that operate in the state of Florida, there's issues of value because of, anyways, for whatever reason, I interact with a lot of Tesla owners, and where their car had been damaged, what have you. These people were never car nuts. These people, they weren't, hey, I had a Mustang GT or anything like that. That wasn't it at all. The Tesla was kind of the first thing that became kind of the first time they ever got connected with a car. And what's actually kind of interesting is I think of all the manufacturers today, as far as which company has the strongest momentum in actually capturing an audience, a growing audience that's very faithful, is Tesla. I think they've actually, and I've got a lot of experience with Porsche, and I can tell you that there's a lot of people that buy Porsche for what it is and what it does. But I can also tell you, that I was also, in all my years of selling, Porsches in Palm Beach, it was all more about, hey, guess what? How much is my lease payment and how does the top go down? Can I get out of here in 20 minutes? Okay, and that was it. Can I just sign my name, give you my credit card, or, and just get out?